We are not professionals. Right? It's good to be the family of God, worshiping together in all of our flaws. Which brings us to the next portion of the service. I did prepare some first-person narratives, 6 people who lived back during the days of Jesus and tried to write the story of the Passion Week through their eyes. Like I said, we are not professionals. I'm not a professional writer. The 6 men who willingly agreed to read are not professionals either. What I told them is all they have to do is come up and read it. They got to do it in the microphone, but they're not memorized. They might stumble or stutter, and that's okay, because we're here to worship together. And hopefully, as we step back in time and see what happened 2,000 years ago in a different way, it'll become more fresh with us. So they're going to come up one by one. I'm not going to introduce them, and they're just going to read as it goes along their script.
My name is Peter. I am the leader of the disciples of Jesus. He chose me specifically for this task, saying that I would be the rock that his assembly would be built on. I don't feel like a rock today. I don't know if you've heard about what happened. My foundation has been shattered. We were enjoying the Passover with our teacher, Jesus. He was acting odd. Yeah, he normally acts odd, but this was worse than normal. During the middle of the Passover meal, he took the bread, broke it, and handed it to us. He said that this was his body broken for us. Then he took the cup later in the meal and passed it to each of us. He said that this cup was the new covenant in his blood. We were to drink it in remembrance of him. I didn't understand what was going on. He departed completely from the normal Passover ritual. As we were still trying to figure out what happened, he told us that we were all going to leave him, quoting some verse from Zechariah. I told him in no uncertain terms that I would not leave him, no matter what anyone else did. He looked at me square in the eyes and said that very night, before the rooster crows, I would deny him 3 times. Me, the rock, the leader of the disciples, deny him 3 times? That was not going to happen. Well, the night went from strange to worse. He led us to his favorite spot on the Mount of Olives. It was a beautiful garden. Even as a fisherman, I could appreciate it. He told us to wait and pray while he went by himself a few paces off. It was a warm night. I could smell the olive trees and night-blooming flowers. It had been a long day. Could you blame me for falling asleep? 3 times he came back to wake up James, John, and me. Even though I was tired, I wasn't going to leave him. I could tell that he was worried about something. No, worried doesn't describe it well. He was mourning something, and he was scared beyond anything I have ever seen him be. The 3rd time he woke us up, we heard a commotion. A group of men carrying torches and swords came rushing up to us. I knew that this was not good. Judas led them up to Jesus, kissing him and calling him Rabbi. Then the men stepped forward to seize Jesus, but that was not going to happen on my watch. I had told Jesus that I was not going to leave him. It was time to prove it. I drew my sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant. The time had come to fight for the hope of Israel and the restoration of the monarchy. Then Jesus rebuked me. He told me to put my sword back. He healed the servant's ear, and he gave himself into their custody. I looked around. All of my friends, the followers of Jesus, were running, scared. To my shame, I joined them. I deserted Jesus. After a few minutes, I met up with John. We both came to our senses and decided to follow Jesus to see where they took him. Not surprisingly, they took him to Caiaphas, the high priest. It seemed that several of the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled there. I entered the courtyard of the high priest to warm myself by the fire and to see what would happen next. I couldn't hear what was going on inside the house, but from the windows, Everything seemed heated. As I was trying to figure out what to do next, a servant girl approached me. She accused me of being one of Jesus' followers. That fear that had consumed me before came back, and I denied that accusation. Another girl came up and said the same thing. And then another one did, claiming my accent gave me away. I began to call down curses on myself, and I swore that I did not know Jesus. And then a rooster crowed, and I remembered what Jesus said. What have I done?
My name is Joseph, but I'm also called Caiaphas. I am the high priest of Israel, serving under the pleasure of the Roman governor of this region. I was appointed by Governor Gratus after my two brothers-in-law had served in this position for less than a year. I know I only hold this position because of my father-in-law, Annas. He was a high priest. When all is said and done, 5 of his sons will be high priests, along with myself, his son-in-law. Even though I am the high priest, even though I am the one in charge, Annas keeps acting like he is in charge. Oh well, sometimes we must accept some things to progress in status. Unlike the Pharisees, we Sadducees do not mind playing politics. Sure, we don't like the Romans, but if we can use them for our own gain, what's the harm? I mean, we all know that there is no resurrection. There is no such thing as the spiritual world. What you see and feel is all there is, so we should make the best of everything before we die and cease to exist. That is what the Sadducees teach, and since we are the majority in the Sanhedrin, our teaching carries more weight than those idiotic Pharisees. I should go back to the point. Yes, I play politics. I try to keep the peace, making sure both sides are happy, which is why I really get unhappy when the individuals start shaking things up. One individual has recently shaken things up. Perhaps you've heard of him, Jesus of Nazareth. We didn't like his teaching, but for the past 3 years he stayed in Galilee. So, yeah, he was a nuisance, but he really only affected the Galileans. And nobody likes the Galileans anyway, so they can have him. Then he left Galilee and started traveling around Judea. He made a deal with the devil and brought Lazarus back from the dead. Hundreds were flocking to see him, claiming to be his followers, dooming their own souls. Even more, he spoke things, and crowds proclaimed prophecies that pointed to the overthrow of Rome. Now, I'm not going to say that life wouldn't be easier with Rome. However, Rome is a military power that none can overthrow. People and nations have tried, and the only result is death and destruction for the rebels. I want to keep the peace, so anyone who tries to destroy the peace will face me for the sake of my nation and this temple. Oh, this temple. Jesus also said that he would destroy this temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Sacrilege and idiocy. I told members of the Sanhedrin when we saw so many people adhering to this rabble-rouser that it would be better for one person to die for the sake of the nation than for a nation to die for one man. So we started to make plans. God was with us. One of his followers, Judas Iscariot, approached us to betray his master. He and I speak the same language. He wanted something for his efforts. I gladly obliged. 30 pieces of silver. Ironically, the price paid the owner of a slave accidentally killed. The fateful day came, the day that would mark my place in history. Judas led my guards to the Mount of Olives and arrested Jesus. He must have known what was coming. He came willingly enough. I called for the chief priest to assemble at my house. so that we could have a short trial and prepare adequate charges to present to Pilate. We also brought in witnesses paid well for their efforts to accuse Jesus of all sorts of things. However, they couldn't get their story straight. Finally, in desperation, I asked Jesus to his face if he was the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One. I could not believe my ears. He gave himself to us. He responded, I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. That was blasphemy, deserving of death. It's almost as if he wanted to die, and die he would.
My name is Pilate. I am prefect of this miserable land of Judea. I often wonder what evil I did to deserve this fate. Sure, the legate of Syria said that this was an honor. Oh, you don't know the legate of Syria? In the hierarchy of Rome, I answered to him, Legate Lucius Aemilius Lamia. However, for the 4 years I have been a prefect of this region, Lucius has been nowhere to be found. I am not going to complain. His absence has freed my hands to do whatever I want with this region. Sometimes, though, I wonder if his experience would help me with some of the aftermath of my choices. I'm the 5th prefect of this region. I won't bore you with the names of my predecessors. They didn't stay long. I don't blame them. This land is full of barbarians. Can you imagine? They only worship one God. Who only worships one God? Well, I decided if I am condemned to be stationed here for an uncertain amount of time, I should have some fun while I'm here. I know you will probably be appalled, but I think I've been clever. I started by sneaking the royal standards with the image of the emperor into Jerusalem in the middle of the night. When the Jews woke up, they were surrounded by images of the worship of the emperor. They weren't happy. I was thrilled. Another time, I needed money to build an aqueduct into Jerusalem. So I used money from the temple treasury. A mob formed, and I ordered my soldiers to beat the filth with clubs. Many people died from the beating or from being trampled by horses, and I got my aqueduct. Then there was a time I mixed the blood of the rebellious Galileans with the temple sacrifices. I might have gone too far that time. Who's to know? I spend most of my time in Caesarea anyway. I only come to Jerusalem for feast days to keep the peace, at least my form of peace. My duties as a prefect are mostly military, policing the region. However, I do have the boring task of being the head of the judicial system. I alone had the power to kill the offenders of the state and to levy taxes. I appointed the high priest of the Jewish faith and shared civil authority with his Sanhedrin. Oh, just thinking about this arrangement makes me want to do something else to them. This week, the Sanhedrin approached me with a problem. When those convening barbarians pretended to be my friend, I knew they have an agenda. They claimed that a prominent teacher from Galilee, a Jesus from Nazarene, was inciting a rebellion against Rome. I knew he was popular, but the only rebellion I had heard him incite was against the chief priests of the teachers of the law. He called them hypocrites. I questioned this man, but he didn't say anything, nothing of significance anyway. Over Passover, I normally would release a prisoner to pretend that I was nice. So I offered the crowd to release either Jesus or a rebel named Barabbas. I expected the crowd to ask for Jesus. They had loved him the day before, and no one likes Barabbas, but the crowd asked for Barabbas. I was confused and asked what I should do with Jesus. They shouted for me to crucify him. The more I asked, the louder they shouted. I have no problem with killing people. I have no problem with crucifying someone. However, this man had done no wrong, and the way the crowd's mindset shifted in 24 hours was confusing. It's like the gods had gotten hold of them. I looked at Jesus, and I saw agony, but I did not see fear. When faced with crucifixion, painful death, he did not struggle. He did not beg for mercy. He waited. Blood from his wounds inflicted on him dripped down his body. I made the decision for the sake of peace. I ordered his crucifixion. The supposed king of the Jews would die. May the God he served have mercy on his soul.
My name is Joseph. I came from the town of Arimathea. I am part of the Sanhedrin, the ruling council of Jerusalem. It is comprised of 71 men of age and experience who had studied the Jewish law, and I was honored to be part of this group. Well, I was honored up until recently. Caiaphas had been fixating on the prophet from Galilee, Jesus. It came to a head just a few days ago when he had Jesus arrested in the middle of the night and tried before the council. The midnight gathering was against the law of Moses, and I refused to attend. None of them know the real reason that I couldn't attend that night. I'd become convinced that Jesus was speaking the truth, and he was speaking the very words of God, and he was going to change the world as we know it. In short, I had become a follower of Jesus in secret, and as much as I was convinced who Jesus was, I could not ruin my reputation or my position on the council by stating my belief publicly. Well, the day after Jesus' arrest changed everything. The council convicted Jesus of blasphemy and condemned him to death. That they incited a riot, convincing the crowd and to demand Jesus' death on the cross. Then they followed Jesus, mocking him down the main road to Jerusalem towards the place of the skull, where the crucifixion would be held. I followed, wishing I could do something. I saw Jesus' mother weeping and the other women seeming numb with grief and pain from time to time. I saw John and another disciple peeking through the crowd, scared to be seen. But mostly I just saw Jesus staggering under the weight of the cross, blood dripping down his body. Hours seemed to drag by, but it didn't take that long. Finally, we reached the top of the hill. I kept hoping for another one of the members of the council would relent and admit this was all a mistake, but instead they kept mocking Jesus, telling him he was the Messiah and he should save himself. Even the criminals who were to be crucified next to him were mocking him. I couldn't bear to see the nails driven into his body. I still hear the screams and the groans. Then the cross was lifted, and everyone's face turned to see the body of Jesus raised to the sky. This was not the change I expected Jesus to bring. If he were the Messiah and the King, where is his message now? The only thing that was left was the plaque hanging above his head, the King of the Jews. What did it all mean? For 3 long hours, Jesus hung there. Even though it was in the middle of the day, the sun stopped shining. Finally, at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out, "It is finished." And then he died. When I saw his lifeless body hanging by those 3 nails, I knew my time, my time for secrecy had come to an end. I needed something to do to show my devotion. So even though I hid it for so long, I purposely went to Pilate's palace and demanded the body of Jesus to be placed in my care. Jesus would not be placed in the burial heap with the common criminals. His body would be laid to rest in the family tomb. I oversaw Jesus being taken down from the cross, wrapped in the linen cloth, and I showed Mary Magdalene and the other Mary where the tomb was so that they could anoint his body after the Sabbath. I stayed there until Pilate's soldiers put the seal on the tomb. Where is the hope for Israel now? I was so sure that Jesus was the hope. He was the Messiah, and he would change the world. The hope is now sealed in the tomb. I was so sure, and I never told him. It began to grow dark, and I walked back to my house. Even though I was not willing to follow him publicly while he was alive, at least now I can now after his death. I just wish I knew what the future holds.
Wow, what a day it has been. I cannot believe what happened. Who am I? My name is Cleopas. You don't know me. No one ever remembers me, but you are going to remember what I have to tell you about today. This day has been crazy. We started meeting with the other disciples, trying to figure out what we were going to do, that Jesus was dead. You had to heard about that, right? Good, because all I am about to tell you is all since Jesus died and was buried. They even put Pilate's seal on the tomb. Well, we were the disciples when suddenly Mary Magdalene, Joanne, Mary, the mother of Jesus, James, and a few other women burst into the room. They were scared and excited, all sorts of other emotions tangled up. I don't do emotions well, but a bunch were going on there. They told us that Jesus' tomb was empty. Remember, the one that had Pilate's seal. Did I tell you about the soldiers? Pilate had also put a guard on the tomb so that no one could steal the body. Jesus' tomb was empty. The guard was on the ground unconscious, and an angel was there. An angel. The angel told the woman that Jesus was alive, and he had risen from the dead. He was going to meet all of us in Galilee. None of us believed the woman. Grief tends to do certain things to a lady's emotion. I must have done something to theirs. Peter and John left the house, and they were to visit the tomb, figure out what was going on. They couldn't find Jesus' body either. I wanted to stay and figure things out, but my friend and I did not have the time to do that. We had to walk to Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and we didn't want to get there too late. As we walked, we talked about the woman had told us about Jesus' arrest and death. We kept trying to make sense of it, but nothing made sense. As we were talking, a man approached us and asked to join our journey. He didn't seem to be a robber, so we agreed. And then we asked what we were talking about, and I asked him if he didn't know what had happened in Jerusalem. Everyone was talking about Jesus' death during the Passover. For some strange reason, he seemed to not know. So even though my heart was really sad, I hate emotion. I told him about Jesus and how he was a prophet, a powerful in word and deed before God and all the people, and how the chief priests handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him, and how he had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. How today was the 3rd day since his death, and some of our women couldn't find Jesus' body at the tomb, and how Peter and John didn't find the body either. The women claimed that Jesus was alive, and we couldn't believe it, and who could? The man looked at us and called us fools and slow to believe the scriptures. I was stunned that a stranger would be so bold. Then, starting with Moses and the prophets, he explained that the Messiah had to suffer and then enter his glory. Those 2 hours passed as fast as Jesus' lectures. But then we arrived at Emmaus, and we were in so awe that how this man explained the scriptures to us that we begged him to stay and talk more. He agreed, and that's when it happened, the craziness. We sat at the table in the inn for supper. He grabbed the bread before I could and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to us. He grabbed the bread that was broken for us, and it was like blinders fell off of our eyes, and there was Jesus. The man who had spent the last 2 hours explaining about the Messiah was our friend, the one who was supposed to be dead. He was alive, eating with us, just like he ate with us before he died. And then he was gone, disappeared. I mean, he rose from the dead. He can do anything. We forgot completely about what we had gone to Emmaus for. We grabbed our cloaks, our bags, and hurried the 7 miles back to Jerusalem. Through the evening, we had to tell the apostles the woman was telling the truth. Jesus is alive.
My name is Thomas. I've been a follower of Jesus since close to the beginning. I imagine myself as the voice of reason amid so many passionate, headstrong fishermen and Matthew. But while some of them might dismiss me as a naysayer, I was devoted. When Jesus was going to come to Jerusalem one last time, I was the one who told them all that we should go with Jesus so that we could die with him. And while we might get frustrated at my questions when Jesus was talking about preparing for a place for us, I was the one who asked what everyone was already thinking. Where is he going? With all my logic and devotion, I did not know what to do when one of our own betrayed Jesus with a kiss. What happened to Judas? Why would he do that? In my confusion, I ran with all the rest of the disciples. I was devoted to Jesus, but if the chief priests were going to capture Jesus, we were next. I hid the rest of the night and the next day. I heard the commotion. The disciples told me what was happening, but I couldn't bring myself to see my Lord dying that miserable death on the cross. I was supposed to die with him, but I couldn't bring myself to stand with him. They laid Jesus' mangled body in Joseph's tomb. I had no idea that he was a follower. But here at Jesus' death, he boldly showed his devotion. What does the future hold for us, who were his followers? When are they going to kill us? We spent a nervous next day waiting for the knock on the door, waiting for Sabbath to be done, and to put this all behind us, maybe. And then the first day of the week, the women went to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body. They hurried back and claimed that Jesus was alive. I can't believe that. He died. Who would raise him to life? He is the only one I knew who could do that, and he is dead. It doesn't make sense. Later that evening, Jesus appeared to Peter. Then Cleopas and his friend hurried back from Emmaus. They claimed to have talked with Jesus for a whole afternoon and had supper with him. To top it off, they were discussing these things with Jesus appeared to them. As you can imagine, they were frightened. Even though they were giddy about Jesus being alive, they couldn't believe it was him. They were never the logic ones. Jesus showed his hands and his side and promised them peace, and they bought it. I wasn't there when Jesus appeared to them. I wasn't there on the road to Emmaus. I wasn't with Peter or with the women at the tomb. I was never there, not even when Jesus died or after he was arrested. I wasn't there. I was supposed to be the devoted one, the one who did what was logical, and I wasn't there. These other disciples accepted the fact that Jesus was alive without real proof. I wanted real proof. If he were alive, the world needs to know. They need to follow him, but they also need proof. I told the disciples that I would not believe unless I felt his body, felt the wounds on his hands and side. That would be proof. With that, I could bring the message of Jesus to the ends of the world. A week later, we were all together in that room again, and Jesus appears, walked right through the locked doors. Then he looked at me and said, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." There was my proof. At that moment, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt who Jesus was. He is my master and my God. The world needs to follow him. I saw him. I have the proof. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. Do you believe?
And that's what it boils down to. We have the proof. People have studied it. They know the evidence is stacked up that Jesus lived 2,000 years ago, he died for us, and he rose again. And over 500 people saw it. There's more evidence that Jesus is than that Jesus never was. But evidence doesn't save. We have a reasonable faith. It's not a leap in the dark, but everyone must make the decision for themselves of whether they believe or not. Whether they're willing to step across the line and say, yes, I will join the ranks of Thomas. I will join the ranks of Cleopas and Joseph and Peter and follow Jesus with my life. Trust him as my Savior. If you have never made that decision for yourself, I encourage you today, do it. Talk to me, talk to any of the guys who read, or anyone else, so we can explain what it means to follow Jesus. And if you have placed your faith in Jesus, you're one of his followers, join the ranks of Thomas, who did take the message of Jesus to the ends of the world at his time, all the way to India. That was beyond all understanding at that time. But he said, the evidence of Jesus is too much. I have to share. And so he did. With that, I'll invite Ardith to come up. If you join me